Welcome everyone, this is On Just Restart, and this time we're focusing on all the different things pointing towards a Nintendo Switch Pro in 2021. Now I understand, the idea of a Switch Pro at this point may be nauseating to some of you. It's been rumored for quite some time already, and it's been coming from all different corners of the internet. But what we're focusing on today are all of the credible different pieces of evidence that I think are pointing towards some sort of Switch revision with potentially 4K capabilities, improved screen technology, and other quality of life improvements to be coming out sometime in 2021. Now before we jump into things, let me quickly talk about my social media. There's a Twitter page, a Discord community, a Patron page, and a Twitch channel. If you are interested in any of that, check it all out, it's linked in the description below. And of course, if you like what you're seeing here, subscribe. So when it comes to Switch Pro rumors, perhaps the biggest one, the motherlode, is the Bloomberg report. Now, Bloomberg has been saying that the Nintendo Switch Pro will be coming out sometime in 2021, and it will potentially be a 4K capable system with improved screen technology, a number of quality of life improvements, and it will be supported alongside a slew of new games, both third-party and Nintendo. That sounds amazing. I would love to see a 4K Switch alongside some amazing new Nintendo games, like say for example Breath of the Wild 2, Monster Hunter Rise, or Mario Odyssey 2. That would be amazing, I would love to see it. But because it sounds so awesome, it almost sounds like it's too good to be true. I understand where some people may have a lot of skepticism towards that. Consider this. The Switch is a mobile piece of technology. It can't even output games at 1080p consistently, or 720p in handheld mode consistently. So the idea that they could just release a revision, not a next generation Switch, but a revision that has 4K capabilities seems to be like a lot. And on top of that, for 2020, Nintendo's software sales have been great, but their software output has not been compared to previous years. Is Nintendo really in a position where they can output a whole bunch of amazing games to support a 4K capable Switch? That sounds like a lot. So I understand why some people may be skeptical of Bloomberg here. But Bloomberg isn't just some random Reddit post or something like that. This is a business reporting site that has no reason to lie or make up things. If they are reporting something, it's because it's based off something real. And they've been doing it several times throughout the last year or so. So many people, like myself, think that there's a lot of credibility here and something is coming in 2021 for this report alone. Naturally, there's a lot more pointing towards a Switch revision than just these Bloomberg reports. Economic Daily News has been reporting that Taiwanese panel manufacturer Dlss is working on mini LEDs for a Switch Pro. Basically, mini LEDs are better screens than what the Switch has right now, so if Nintendo were to be using these mini LEDs for a Switch Pro, it would be a better screen with better contrast and games would look better on this screen. But on top of improved screen technology, Nvidia, the actual company behind the hardware for the Switch, is working on something pretty new and exciting, and that is Dlss 2.0. Now if you don't know what that is, I'll explain it in layman's terms. I don't know that much about technology, but I know what this basically is supposed to do. Basically, it's this artificial intelligence technology that looks at the image of a screen, and from that image, this improved high-resolution image, it learns what needs to be done to improve the resolution of a particular game. So if they were to use this technology in, say, a game like Doom on Nintendo Switch, which can't even run at 720p, they will be able to run Doom on Nintendo Switch at perhaps even 4K resolutions with far less computing power, basically allowing the Switch to run games at 4K resolutions. So the idea of Switch Pro running at 4K all of a sudden is possible because Nvidia is working on Dlss 2.0. We've even seen them put up an ad that suggests that they are hiring people to work on this for a next generation piece of technology or a new gaming piece of hardware. Now that could just be for like something like an Nvidia Shield or what have you. Nvidia does more than just a Nintendo Switch, but it also could be for the Nintendo Switch, and this kind of technology is very fitting for Switch Pro. But either way, because of what we're seeing from Nvidia, and because of this report from Economic Daily News, the idea of a Switch with 4K capabilities and improved screen technology isn't really that crazy anymore, So the Bloomberg report is looking to hold a little bit more water now once you look at these other things from other companies. Going beyond these reports and these hiring ads, I think there's actually a little bit more that is supporting the idea of a Switch revision coming out next year. Now, one of these things is the fact that the Nintendo Switch is a mobile piece of hardware, and we've already seen some revisions on it already, like the Switch Lite and the updated version of the base Switch. There's a few versions of the Switch out already. It's looking like Nintendo's treating the Switch a lot like their handheld systems, like the 3DS for example. The 3DS saw a whole bunch of different revisions throughout its lifetime. The new 3DS, the 2DS, the new 3DS XL, there's a lot of different versions of the 3DS, and there's also a lot of different versions of the DS and the Game Boys and such. So if Nintendo is treating the Switch like a mobile piece of technology, there's definitely going to be different revisions coming out for the Switch throughout its lifetime. So the premise of a new revision with improved technology to come out next year really isn't crazy at all when you consider the history of Nintendo. In fact, it should be expected. And on the note of there being multiple revisions during the Switch's lifetime, it's been said this year multiple times by different Nintendo executives that the Switch is only about halfway through its lifetime. If that's really the case, they're gonna need more revisions to lengthen that lifespan here. We are kind of in a situation right now where it may be about that time to have that mid-gen refresh, the way Sony did with the PS4 Pro or the way Microsoft did with the Xbox One X. Nintendo could be doing something similar. And I would say it makes sense to do it in 2021 because right now, the PlayStation 5 has come out as well as the Series X, and while they came out this year, next year is when they're going to finally really start pumping out games and become more readily available. And next year it's going to make sense for Nintendo to do different things to stay relevant. One of those things may be to release a new piece of hardware that has improved technologies, perhaps even 4K capabilities. If Nintendo does something like this, that could help steer some new customers away from PlayStation and Xbox and have them buy this Switch revision instead. And to further support that idea of Nintendo competing against the next generation of systems next year, it's looking like there's going to be a lot of new games coming out next year as well. And I'm not just referring to the Bloomberg report where they're saying a slew of games is coming out next year. Typically during the third or fourth year for a particular system, we start to see the best games come out for that particular system. It's like that second generation of games after the developers have already made their initial wave of games, they've already bringing out their second wave of games. And if you look at the games we saw in 2017, Xenoblade Chronicles 2, Super Mario Odyssey, Breath of the Wild, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, ARMS, Splatoon 2, all of those games were made internally by Nintendo, and they all came out in 2017. We are now entering 2021, meaning it's been about 4 years since all these developers have made big new games. Now I know Monolith Soft has brought out Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition, but that's a remaster of an old game. They have several different studios. They could very well have another game in the works that could be ready for next year. The point is though, that if you look at the development cycles for Nintendo's big developers, 2021 is looking like the ideal time to start releasing some of those games. The big games, like Breath of the Wild 2 for example. That game was announced and shown to us back at E3 2019, but we know they started development back in 2017. And Zelda's anniversary is this year, the 35th anniversary, and based off what we've seen from different trademarks for Mario and how that led to Mario's 35th anniversary and what we've seen for Zelda's trademarks, it is looking like Nintendo will do some sort of major celebration for Zelda as well, and if that's the case, it feels like a very likely bet that Breath of the Wild 2 will be coming out next year to support potentially a Switch revision and Zelda's anniversary, and just have an amazing game to come out for 2021. And following that train of thought for Zelda supporting a Switch revision, I think there's something else coming as well. Now, I don't specifically think that Breath of the Wild 2 will be coming out at launch for a Switch revision, but that is a possibility, but what I'm thinking is something a little different. So if we look at the release for the new 3DS XL back in 2015, February 2015, we saw the release for The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask 3D and Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate. But then fast forward to September 2019 for the Switch Lite launch, we saw a remake for The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening and Dragon Quest XI's. So the reason why I brought those up is because those are examples of two different revisions for Nintendo, where they released two different games in that month at the same time as the revision. One of them was a Zelda game, a Zelda remaster or remake, and another was a big third-party game. This March, to close out the fiscal year, we are getting Monster Hunter Rise. But as I brought up earlier, Zelda's anniversary is in 2021, the 35th anniversary I'm saying. It's of course there's an anniversary every single year, but the 35th anniversary is next year, and it's looking like Nintendo may be celebrating that with a few different things, perhaps beyond just Breath of the Wild 2. Potentially a Zelda collection, or maybe even just Skyward Sword HD. Considering that the anniversary is actually this February, it wouldn't surprise me if Nintendo announces Skyward Sword HD around that time, and we see both a Skyward Sword HD and a Monster Hunter Rise come out in March alongside a Nintendo Switch revision. Considering that Bloomberg was initially saying that the Switch revision would come out in early 2021, this would all make sense. But at the same time, I think it should be noted that 2020 has been a very interesting year because of the pandemic. A lot of games were delayed or moved up or what have you. It's possible that if maybe at one point Nintendo is planning to come out with a Switch revision for March 2021, that date may be a little bit later into the year now because of the pandemic. But either way, it's looking like 2021 is going to have a lot of really big Nintendo games, and when we've seen a lot of big Nintendo games come out in a particular year, it's usually to support a new revision for that particular system during that generation. Now before we close things out, there's one more thing I want to touch on that could perhaps be supporting the idea of a Switch revision coming out in 2021. And that's the mystery behind March 31st. Now what am I getting at here? How would a particular day be suggesting something about a Switch revision? It may not be. Just let me make that clear. It may not be at all. But typically, we do see gaming companies, even with Nintendo, release things close to the end of a fiscal year. We are getting Monster Hunter Rise to close out Nintendo's fiscal year. That may very well go down as the biggest third-party release for the entire Switch's lifespan. It's a big deal. And there may be something else, perhaps some sort of Zelda remaster as we talked about earlier. So it would definitely make sense to have some sort of Switch revision to come out around that time. But they also may wait a little bit longer. Either way though, Nintendo has been very weird about their messaging in terms of what's coming out after March 31st. Because with Mario's 35th anniversary, it's seeming like all of the Mario anniversary stuff will expire or no longer be available after March 31st. And Doug Bowser recently was questioned about this with a Polygon interview, and basically he just said it's because of a celebration. But here's the interesting thing. It's not just Mario. It's Fire Emblem as well. For Fire Emblem's 30th anniversary, we got the original Fire Emblem game. It came out this month in December. But it's a limited release. It won't be available for much longer. It's also expiring this March. Why is this happening? Why are both these anniversaries expiring in March? What's going on here? I understand it's the close of the fiscal year, but that doesn't mean they have to take these games off the eShop. They are selling, people want them. Why would Nintendo get rid of these games? They are making Nintendo money. I don't understand it. Unless they are planning some sort of change here that will reincorporate these games. So here's something interesting that maybe not all of you know, maybe some of you do. 3D All-Stars is actually emulating the different games. Nintendo went ahead and made brand new emulators for these different games in 3D All-Stars. Why would they do that? It seems kind of weird to do that just for a compilation of 3 old Mario games, unless they have plans to use these emulators for other N64 and GameCube and Wii games on the Nintendo Switch. If a Switch revision is coming out next year, that would support the idea of a mid-gen refresh. If a whole bunch of big games are coming out, it would make sense that maybe Nintendo's going to have a few different big presentations. Maybe some of those presentations have announcements for other things beyond just big brand new games and a Switch revision. Perhaps they'll talk about how they're handling their online, for example. Maybe that will include some new things. Or maybe not new things, but rather reincorporating old things. Maybe there will be some sort of virtual console introduced to Nintendo's online. We're already getting free NES and Super Nintendo games if you have Nintendo's online service, but maybe Nintendo doesn't want to go ahead and continue that trend with GameCube, N64, and Wii. Maybe they want to start selling these games separately, and maybe that's why we're seeing these emulators for 3D All-Stars, which would explain why they're expiring this March, because they plan on reintroducing these games as separate individual releases alongside other games from GameCube and the 64 and Wii on Nintendo's eShop. That would make sense, and perhaps that's going to coincide with some sort of mid-gen refresh with a whole bunch of announcements that will be sort of doing a whole bunch of new things for Nintendo's Online, the operating system for the Switch, big new games coming out, and obviously also a Switch revision. It's possible that's what these expiring anniversary releases could be hinting at, potentially. And even if it isn't, everything else I feel like is in support for some sort of revision coming out next year. The Bloomberg report, Economic Daily News' report about new LCDs, Nvidia working on Dlss 2.0, this trend of Nintendo releasing new revisions for their mobile hardware, the fact that the Switch is only halfway through its life cycle, the fact that Nintendo will need to do things to compete against the next generation systems, PS5 and Series X, but also the fact that a lot of big games from Nintendo came out in 2017. 2021 is looking to be the Switch's peak year, where we get that second wave of Nintendo's biggest games. And if we look at the history of different revisions, Nintendo usually releases a whole bunch of big games alongside those revisions. So I would say that it's a pretty good bet to say that something new in terms of new Switch hardware will be coming out next year, and the idea of some sort of new Switch with 4K upscaling technology and a new screen technology isn't really that crazy. So I think there's a pretty good chance that this could be happening. Is it for sure? No, we don't know what will happen until Nintendo confirms it. There are all sorts of possibilities here, but if I had to bet, I do think a Switch revision will be coming out in 2021, and it will have improved visuals and improved screen technology. But we shall see. What do you guys think is happening? Let me know in the comments below. Anyways everyone, this is Untitled Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.